Hello and welcome into the Take 10 podcast. This is Alex Roux of Big Ten Network. Today's guests are Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News and Harold Shelton of Big Ten Network. Let's get into it.
Take a look, listen, and enjoy. Look at here, look at here.
With the catch, the finish. Oh, my goodness. What a catch.
Oh,
Energy,
my goodness.
enthusiasm. It's picked off. It's selfish. Brilliant.
He's still going. Touchdown.
All right, starting off here, we got Mike DeCourcy, like I mentioned at the top. He's been on the show several times. Always a great interview, always in-depth and thorough in his evaluations of Big Ten and college hoops. So wanted to get him on as the college basketball season is about to tip off here today, Wednesday, November 25th. And got a ton of hoops coming at you to overlap with our football season, which we do talk football with Harold Shelton, BTN's manager of research, later in the show. But let's start it off with Mike DeCourcy. You likely know him if you watch Big Ten Network. He's an analyst for us as well. And like I said, knows his college hoops. So let's get into it. Very pleased to be rejoined by Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News, Big Ten Network. Have him on pretty much every year, I think, now to talk preseason Big Ten hoops, preseason college basketball. And of course, you can follow him on Twitter at TSN Mike. Mike, welcome back. It's a fun time of year.
It is, Alex. You know, usually when we do this, we're getting together after we've all gotten together at Big Ten Media Day. And that's a day I always enjoy. It's such a fun day to get together with all the basketball people from around the league and see the players. It's always been a delight, and it really gets you back into the swing. And obviously this year we didn't do that. And the swing is a little different, but I'm looking forward to the fact that we're going to have college basketball. I think it's the right thing to do relative to the alternatives. I don't agree with some of the suggestions of people about delaying the season. I don't think they're taking everything into account. And so I'm really looking forward to the Thanksgiving week, the start of the season. There are going to be disruptions. It's not going to be easy, but I think we can have a successful season, and I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise, I agree. I'm glad you brought that up, though, about the benchmark kind of being basketball media day. And usually we're kind of like the unofficial red carpet fashion police. So, you know, media day is one thing that kind of sets the pace for our off season and eases us into the normal basketball calendar. What else have you kind of missed, you know, with this non-traditional off season? Because as somebody who follows it even less closely than you are such a hoop head, and I'm still focused on football. It seems like I'm just being thrown right into the deep end here. So what do you miss on top of media day as we sit here in late November?
Well, the opportunity to go out and see some teams practice, to really connect with what they're up to, what they're doing, and just sort of get the basketball flowing through your blood again. And even if you want to go back to the summer, the chance to go to the camps, the Peach Jam or wherever, and go and hang out with some basketball people and sit crammed together next to people on little folding chairs and watch the next generation of basketball prospects. That was all gone this year. So there's so much that's different. It's one of the reasons why I think it's something. I think one of the things that the delay of the Big Ten football season taught us is how important this really is to the athletes. I hear so much cynicism about this, but I saw how the athletes reacted to the withdrawal of the season, or postponement, however you want to look at it. And then I spoke to Wyatt Davis and I spoke to Shaun Wade after the season was restored, and they said, okay, I'm back in, I'm playing, and what it meant to them. And you can see that now pretty much every Saturday, how much it means to them to be a part of that team at Ohio State. And I really respect that. And I have no doubt that carries over into basketball. I haven't spoken to Luka Garza since he made his announcement They had a conference call the day he made his decision to withdraw from the NBA draft and come back to college. But that on that day, he came back because he wasn't, I mean, there was no signed contract in blood that there was going to be a season, but he came back under the understanding there was going to be a season. He could be making a lot of money right now. Not in the NBA necessarily. He could be doing that perhaps, but he could have signed a contract in Europe for easily into six figures and chose, no, I want to be with the Hawkeyes. This is important to me. I want to be a part of this team. I want to lead this team to something special, to something that hasn't happened at Iowa for a very long time. And I'm capable of doing that. And I think that I'm not saying that you owe him a season at all costs, but I'm saying you owe him the best chance to have a season. And I really believe that what the NCAA has done in conjunction with the various conferences is the most likely to produce that outcome. There's a lot of discussion about, well, there's no plan. And look, there are 353 Division I teams. There are 32 conferences. They all have different approaches, different standards, different resources. To expect that to operate in the same way that the National Football League does is preposterous. It's a ludicrous conceit. What they're trying to do is provide a framework for all those 353 schools and 32 conferences to try to construct a regular season that will produce a field of 68 teams that can compete in an NCAA tournament. And I think that they've presented a reasonable framework to do that. And it's up to the schools then to go about trying to construct a season in that. And some schools we've seen have been very certain, they've been very much focused on, well, we have a young team, so we're going to play lots of, low major teams. And then when the low major teams have issues, all of a sudden people, how could you have anticipated that? Well, the big timers are testing every day. Others are not. So you've decided to go down this road. And if that's the road you're going to go down, you're going to have potentially more disruptions, or you're going to have different protocols relative to your competition that maybe don't match up as well. I've been a little disappointed in the way the coaches have approached scheduling through all of this. I had a conversation with Mick Cronin from UCLA probably about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, in which he said, look, my colleagues are not getting this right. What we should be doing is, with everything that happened last March and everything that's possibly going to happen this winter, we should be doing everything we can to give these guys an experience and to play games that they're going to enjoy playing in, and to not worry about, well, maybe if I lose one game to a big time team early on, I won't make the NCAA tournament or something like that. So I need to, brush up with a couple of lightweights or something like that. He said, look, you got to play good teams. And when their tournament fell apart in Orlando because of COVID protocols, the ESPN pulled out, decided not to stage the tournaments that they own because they were concerned about liability and that sort of thing. So what did UCLA do? They called up San Diego State, which was one of the 5 best teams in America last year, and said, hey, you want to play? And they're going to play. I think we should have more of that in college basketball this season than we probably will. But I know this: Gonzaga's doing it, Kansas is doing it, UCLA, we're seeing it in the Big Ten. There are going to be good games. There are going to be games. And we can't just focus on the fact that there are going to be disruptions, and there are already disruptions.
Yeah, I often find myself agreeing with your perspectives when you defend the college experience and kind of go against the cynicism a little bit, because for every Jalen Green or LaMelo Ball who either go overseas or go to the G League path, there are dozens, if not more, players who do find value and find meaning in this college experience, right? There's the teams they're committed to, fan bases they're attached to, and the payoff that could come back around down the road. I'm as pro player as anybody, but I think people too easily discount the value look, I was at the college football playoff last year, roaming around. We were trying to find good social content around the games and Ohio State fans. And Braxton Miller and Johnny Dixon are at the club in downtown Scottsdale being paid to be there because Ohio State fans want to be around them, and that's something I think that people discount too easily surrounding the college experience. So I'm got off on a little tangent here, but I'm glad you brought that up. And speaking of value around all of college athletics, I found it interesting not only in the sense of scheduling and convenience, but found it interesting that Indy is potentially going to reap the benefit of the entire NCAA tournament being held in that region. They've lost out on a lot, as you know, being an Indy guy with the NBA All-Star Game and the Big Ten tournament last year, and now the Final Four probably going to be a shell of what it usually is in Indy. So what are your thoughts on the tournament being held most likely in Indiana, in the Indianapolis area? It's a nice make good for the region, like I said, and probably a place that is just as well equipped anywhere outside of Orlando or Vegas to hold this type of event. So how do you feel about the tournament kind of coming to your backyard?
Yeah, I think one of the things, Alex, that people who are decrying this particular decision or critiquing it are missing is that the people who run the NCAA championships are tremendous at what they do. The NCAA tournament every year, with the exception of 2020, goes off like a clock. It is always right on time. It is always ideal. And the experience for the players is terrific. And the experience for the fans is terrific. And that's because the planning and the institutional knowledge that goes into it with the NCAA staff is tremendous. And I really honestly believe if for some reason you had to say, okay, the 14 cities you had planned for this year's NCAA tournament are all are now illegal to hold the tournament in. You have to find 14 new cities. I think they could turn that around in a snap. I think they absolutely, everything else is the same as ordinary, except you can't go to the 14 cities you'd chosen. You have to find 14 new ones and do it in 4 months. I think they could do that they're so good at it. They could do it. But what they have to do instead is to create an entirely new experience, an entirely new set of standards, an entirely new set of protocols, all with the pandemic looking over their shoulders. And I don't think that people are appreciating the challenge that is for the staff. And being able to, the only bit of serendipity, so to speak, that there's been for the NCAA over the course of the last 11 months or so is that the Final Four was already planned for here in Indianapolis. So that's a plus for them because they don't have to find another place to hold that. That's where they're already going to be. And then, so then you build around that to perhaps other arenas in town, Bankers Life Fieldhouse, where the Big Ten tournament's been on many occasions, Hinkle Fieldhouse, where Butler plays their home games, perhaps the State Fair Coliseum, where IUPUI plays, perhaps go to a couple of Big Ten schools and see if they are willing to loan out or rent out their arenas in Mackey and Assembly Hall, perhaps. I think those are all possibilities. They're probably going to need more than what is available within the city of Indianapolis. And so they can do all that. And when they face an obstacle or some sort of challenge that needs to be resolved and probably will be more easily resolved in person, instead of having to get on a plane and go to Spokane or go to Fresno or Long Beach or wherever, they just get in a car and drive to Bloomington or drive to West Lafayette or drive right down the street 50 blocks to Bankers Life. That's going to help them solve the challenges that they face. I know that they're going to be able to pull this off because, like I said, they're really good at what they do. And the facilities are in the area to be able to pull it off. But think about it in your own head. How do you schedule that all out when you only have, 8 to 10 arenas available to you or whatever it is? And there's the complication, and Dan Gavitt talked about this in a conference call with those of us who cover college basketball nationally about a week ago. He said that unlike the typical tournament atmosphere, which we've seen at the Big Ten tournament, we've seen at numerous NCAAs, where somebody, let's say it's the Big Ten tournament and Rutgers beats Michigan and Rutgers is excited. I want to use that game because that was the game that was going to be scheduled. That was the one that was shut down just when we showed up at Bankers Life last year for the second round. So Rutgers beats Michigan. Rutgers celebrates a little. Mike or Rick interviews let's say Geo Baker and they're all excited. But while they're doing all that, they put 29, 30 minutes up on the scoreboard clock, and here comes Illinois and Iowa or whoever. And you can't do that now. You have to, that the NCAA is saying they're going to, basically not shut it down, but everybody's going to leave and they're going to bring in the cleaning crew and the sanitation and the sanitizing or whatever. And then they're going to be able to play. And I don't know how much, they didn't say, and they probably haven't figured it out yet, how much time needs to be in between games at a particular site. But I don't think you're going to be able to do a 4-game day in any particular site next year. If they do, they're probably going to have to start, they would have to start it at maybe 8 a.m. and finish at midnight. So I think they're going to have different components like that to the planning process that they're going to have to keep resolving. And those are things that people aren't taking into account when they criticize the decision to bring it all to Indianapolis, or they criticize to play the tournament more or less as scheduled in March, April.
Yeah, and we got a long way to go before we get there. I'm looking forward to see how it turns out. And I do want to get into some Big Ten prognostications with you, Mike, because start on Wednesday. That's when this episode drops, so we don't have a lot of turnaround time. People are going to be listening and then getting ready for the games on the same day. So got a lot of talented teams and a balanced, deep conference once again in the Big Ten this year. And I want to start at the top. And instead of going team by team, I want to do a little thought exercise with you. If one of these teams has to go from the top 4 of the Big Ten, I need you to let me know which one maybe doesn't belong out of Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan State. Those are kind of the tiers that I've seen from the national media and certain polls, certain preseason rankings. And in every different iteration, I see fans chirping, where I live on social media, saying either they belong or this team doesn't belong. Michigan State fans, I think, feel a little slighted because often they are not elevated to that tier this year with what they were losing and guys we just saw go last week in the NBA draft. So out of those 4 teams, who do you think maybe would fall to that second tier and who belongs near the top in contention for a Big Ten title this year?
Well, what's interesting about that is I think the first 3 that you mentioned are the most solid. They and when I say most solid, I think Rutgers is rock solid, but I just don't think their ceiling is as high as those first 3. So Michigan, what's interesting about Michigan State in that quartet is that they have way more questions than the other 3 and way less certainty, but they also probably have a higher ceiling than any of them. Maybe Illinois has a higher ceiling if the freshmen come in and are great, and if Io comes in and starts to make shots, Io DeSumo starts to make shots, they can probably match ceilings. Or if Iowa could suddenly defend like a top 35 defense, and I think they got better last year. They got a lot better, but it's a long trip from 85th, 95th to 30th or 35th. They can find a way to do it. They are elite. That's why the preseason is, you have things that you think in the preseason that maybe don't pan out exactly right. But what I'm getting to is that Michigan State, if everything goes right, I think that they can be better than all those teams. It's just a lot to ask so many different variables to all come to exact perfection or exactly ideal that point guard figures itself out in a way that, you're going from a superstar point guard who was the definition of your program for 2 years and a terrific leader for 3. You're going from that to what are we going to do? You go from a absolute rock solid double contender in Xavier Tillman to a lot of really talented guys who haven't been proven. You look at a guy like Aaron Henry, who I've been looking at as a potential pro from the minute we first saw him on BTN, but still has to say, okay, I'm that guy. So that's a lot of questions. So that's why for me, they're top 15, top 10, that they would be the shakiest of that group. But again, I really do think that they have a very high ceiling. And if I'm a Michigan State fan, I'm not worried about whether the national media has me ranked in the top 10. I'm worried about can all those questions get answered with exclamation points? And they could. They got one of the best coaches in the history of the game, and who by the way, who has a tradition of when things are absolutely dead solid great going into the year, sometimes they don't go as well. But when they have talent and questions, he always seems to find the answers. So I think Michigan State's in a very nice position at this point.
All right, so what about that next tier, Mike? You got Rutgers, like you mentioned. Michigan is very intriguing. Indiana and Purdue, maybe Ohio State or Minnesota. There's going to be, I think, a lot of teams kind of in that 9 to 4 or 5 range in the Big Ten this year. So who do you think in tier 2, unofficial tier 2, is maybe 1 or 2 teams that could make some noise?
Well, the first team that I look at in that group is Michigan, because they've got two guys who can be superstars on the wing in Isaiah Livers and Franz Wagner. And they, much like Michigan State, lost their point in their post. And so can you rebuild those two positions with such great options on the wing? And they've added talent on the wing as well, in addition to those two guys who are going to be great. They brought in the transfer from Wake Forest, Shondae Brown. So that makes them even more dynamic. But those two positions are the core of just about any basketball team. And so can Eli Brooks be a big time Big Ten point guard? Get the ball where it needs to go, make the shot when it comes back to you. We know he can make the shot. Can he get the ball where it needs to go? Can he get by people if he needs to? Can he stop people? Remember, Xavier Simpson was as good as anybody's ever been at that. So those are the questions I have about Michigan. But I like having that foundation of two guys that I know can get me 20 and I know can make deep shots every night. Ohio State, a lot of solidity there. Where's the dynamism come from? You can probably win double figure games in this league, or double figure games and have a winning record, because double figure now is a 500 record. But you could probably have a 11-9, 12-8 record, being a great defensive team and that makes enough shots to win. The kind of team that, say, West Virginia was in the Big 12 last year. But if you want to compete with the best teams in the league, you have to have that scoring punch. And that's a question for the Buckeyes, where that comes from with this group. I'm not saying they don't have it. I'm just saying that's the question that's out there. Rutgers, can they make shots? Because they're gonna grind you into the court. They're gonna get the ball inside. They're gonna get the ball to the rim. If they make enough deep shots, they're not that far from that top quartet we talked about. And Indiana, for me, the question is, how does the backcourt work? You bring in Christian Lander, and you already have a veteran point guard in Robert Finney. You play them both together. Who's in charge? Whose responsibility is what? Who guards the other team's point guard? I would suppose that the answer to the last one would be Finney, but sometimes we get surprised. So if that works out, I think Indiana's in really good shape, because they've got, in Lander and Trace Jackson Davis, two outstanding talents. And so if Lander works out as a high level freshman, and Trace makes the progress that we expect him to make in terms of taking his game a little bit away from the goal, I think Indiana has terrific potential to chase that first quartet. I don't think that, as good as those teams are, I don't think they're safe from just about anybody that we might talk about in that next group of 5 or 6 teams.
So, Mike, being our Indiana guy, our expert, sitting between sort of on the map, Bloomington and West Lafayette, who would you say, and because these fan bases and their expectations, which fan base would you say, Indiana or Purdue, will be sitting in April more content, more happy, and pleased with their season? Hoosiers or Boilermakers?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if we're right about Indiana and they're a top 30-ish team, which would be, let's just say that's where they wind up, and that's an 8 or 9 seed. Are they going to be happy with that? It's certainly a step forward in terms of last year they were probably going to wind up as a 10-ish, depending obviously on what might have happened in Indianapolis. But I can't remember my last bracket, and I haven't checked it in a while. But I think I know they were fighting to stay in as we got to the Nebraska game. They certainly had to win that game. And I think my last bracket probably had them around a 10, which is basically last few teams in. You put them as a solid 8. You're still in an 8-9 game, and you have to play a 1 seed in the second round. Would that be a happy experience for Indiana? They're a tough group to please. If Purdue turns it around and they make a step back toward being who they traditionally have been, I think Purdue fans, I'm not saying they're easier to please, but I think that there's a level of understanding among the core Purdue fans that Matt's terrific, that he's the guy they want to lead their program, that he works there in West Lafayette, and that it's in good hands. Where there's still some skepticism about Arch. He walked into a more difficult situation than some in the fan base allowed or continue to allow. And he's trying to build it up by getting the best players in Indiana. They missed this fall on their key target in that regard, but they got the best player in the state 3 years running. So I think that they're making a lot of progress. Maybe they need to outperform an 8 seed in order to really show that you've come far. But I mean, goodness, when you look at the strength of this league, you could be terrific and wind up in that spot. And that's kind of what I'm predicting for Indiana. Terrific, but still struggling to make the top 25 because the league is so good.
There's going to be some serious star power player-wise in the Big Ten this year. You got your reigning Big Ten Player of the Year in Luka Garza. You got plenty of National Player of the Year attention. Ayo Dosunmu is probably the biggest surprise return of the offseason. I think the pandemic definitely played a factor there, but he has plenty to prove, and he was on fire toward the end of last year. So those are the two guys right there off the top. You have a few more candidates to make some serious noise as well this season, but I'm just curious if you think Luka will reign and defend his title as Big Ten Player of the Year, or if Ayo Dosunmu will take it, or if there's somebody we're not thinking about that I haven't named. Kofi Coburn also returned at Illinois. There's plenty of good players in this league this year. Who do you think will walk away as the premier player in the Big Ten?
It's hard for me to go against Luka Garza. Remember, Sporting News was one of, I think, 2 or 3 publications that named him National Player of the Year. I have tons of respect for Obi Toppin. I thought he was terrific last year. But watching what Luka did against the army of tremendous big men that were in this league last year, and having to go against them every night, just about every night, and continuing to produce at a ridiculous level. What he ended with 9 consecutive 20-point games or something like that on a team that needed that production to continue to be in games with such a deep conference. If they have the season that they're capable of having, I think that it's going to be hard for anybody not only to beat him out for Conference Player of the Year, but for National Player of the Year. The thing about Luka is, those of us who've observed him over his time, and Dave Revson from the network raves about Luka in the regards of his work ethic, and how when he called the Indiana game last year in Bloomington, at the end of the game, Luka still had his energy tank on full when in what was a really draining game that went back and forth, and he just continued to beat people up the floor to get to his positions where he wanted to go. He is amazing in that way. So you can't see him saying, okay, I was Sporting News National Player of the Year, that trophy or whatever, that award's going to look nice on my resume. That's good enough. He didn't come back for that. He came back to tear the whole place down. And I fully expect him to do it. I don't know exactly what the numerical reflection of that will be, whether the scoring numbers will go up, the rebounding numbers will go up, but I expect him to be an even better player because he is becoming a better player. And so I'll be shocked if he's not the Big Ten Player of the Year, and would be fairly surprised if he weren't the National Player.
All right, Mike. Last question. I cannot let you go without one, making a Final Four prediction, because I'm sure you're going to be there in your backyard. I hope the pandemic has progressed enough in a positive direction where I can be there as well. Not holding my breath, but we got to have some optimism here. So, also need your national perspective, because we haven't talked too much about non-Big Ten teams or players yet. So, what are some Final Four contenders? Who do you believe will end up in Indianapolis at the end of the year? Let's hear your most on-the-spot prediction of the podcast to close it out here.
Talk about tiers before in the Big Ten. I think that there's a tier as well nationally, and that team is that tier consists of three teams: Gonzaga out west, Villanova out east, and Baylor in the Southwest. Those are three teams that, no matter where you go, Blue Ribbon, Lindy's, Athlon, whoever's publishing, CBS, ESPN, whoever's doing a preseason top 25, I think you'll see those three in some order at 1, 2, 3. I don't think you'll see too many teams that aren't those three in many projections that are out there. They're pretty solidly a cut above entering the year. They brought a lot back from last season. They were all terrific a year ago. Villanova maybe not quite as good as the other two, but only lost Sadiq Bey and continued to recruit at a high level. So that's the tier. And then the question is, who's the fourth team? And that becomes really interesting. And you'll see different, everybody else will have a different team. We put Kentucky in ours, Kentucky, because I like to bet on talent, and John Calipari's experience with Kentucky's rolling one and dones has been pretty good. They've been in, I think, of the last 10 tournaments that we had, they were in the Elite Eight 7 times. So I expect they'll be pretty high. But then after you get past them, then it's some combination of Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, at Kansas, and Duke. And so that's 3 Big Ten teams right there that are contenders for the Final Four. And like I said before, if everything goes right at Michigan State, they're good enough to do that, without a doubt in my mind. And we've seen Tom do it 8 times. So it wouldn't be a shock to see him do it again.
Well, if you want a real scientific way to predict this, not only because I went to Illinois, but they go every 16 years at the Final Four, 1989, 2005, 2021. So,
wow,
not just a little nugget for you there to throw into an article or prediction. It's science. You can't really deny.
I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mike, I appreciate you jumping on. A lot of fun as always. Can't tell you how excited I am to get college basketball back. Like, football is great, but I think I'm a basketball guy at heart. You know how it is living in the Midwest, Indiana, Illinois. It's kind of in our blood. So appreciate you jumping on, and hope to see you in the studio and then down the road at the Final Four in Indy.
Can't wait, Alex. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again to Mike for joining me. Always great talking with him. Wanted to get Harold on as well. Coming up here, Harold Shelton, if you've not heard the show before, is the manager of research at BTN. And he's not only a numbers guy, he can speak his stats onto the airwaves like he does here on the show. Very talented at that. Honestly, he should be getting paid to do his own show somewhere, because much like a Stanford Steve at ESPN or or this kind of trend of producers who find their way on air, Harold has definitely some talents that extend beyond the page. So always appreciate him coming on out of the goodness of his heart to talk both football and basketball. And I'll be quiet and let Harold do his thing. It is Take 10 Podcast Discussion with Harold Shelton. Starts right now.
All right, very pleased to be rejoined by Harold Shelton in this holiday week. Busy week, so big props to you for hopping on, carving out some time. H, is this the most hectic Thanksgiving week you could remember, or did it all kind of blend together, pandemic or not?
It's definitely busy. I don't know if it's the busiest. I think it actually helps that I'm working from home, and so I get to save the commute time and the train time, all that kind of stuff. Because that part was always hectic, trying to fight people, trying to get in and out of the city and stuff like that. And you spend more time either waiting on the train or stuck on the highway. At least from home, I can just kind of lock in at my dining room table or my bed and just crank out a bunch of notes. And so it doesn't seem as bad because I save a little time that way.
It's weird because with basketball starting up, we're being kind of tossed right in here. Usually we're settled in a couple weeks deep at this point. But with it all starting up, today, if you're listening to this on the day the episode drops, it's a lot to take in. Then football we got coming back on Friday. You got family obligations, I'm sure, on Thursday. So just looking at, from a Big Ten perspective, football this weekend doesn't seem to be that enticing. I'm glad we have hoops to kind of balance it out, give us something fresh. So are you looking more forward to basketball this weekend or the football slate we got ahead of us?
I think I'm still just in a football mode right now. So my mind is kind of locked on football. I do think that Saturday will be interesting, at least from my perspective, because you got Northwestern, Michigan State football at 3:30, and then Michigan State basketball hosts Notre Dame at 8. So you kind of get the back-to-back action there. But even though it's still, a slower slate on the football side, not as many enticing matchups, I think I'm still just so locked into football that's where I'll be. And luckily, a lot of the games are spaced out. There's not a bunch of overlapping windows, maybe a little bit in the noon, but you got Wisconsin at 2 Eastern and Michigan State, Northwestern at 3:30, Purdue, Rutgers at 4. So stuff is definitely spaced out, which helps.
Yeah, and since we've talked last, it's been a couple weeks, and Northwestern has just completely legitimized themselves since the preview episode we did a month or so ago, and then the follow-up episode. And we haven't talked that much about them, but they are completely rock solid. Last year was an aberration, clearly, and they've got kind of that swagger back. Coach Fitz is talking. The team has got that attitude kind of following after Coach Fitz with the chip on their shoulder, the underdog mentality. You think Michigan State is a shot, or you think Northwestern's going to kind of roll here now that they've got Wisconsin out of the way, their biggest hurdle to the path to Indy?
I just think that Michigan State has such a hard time moving the football, and I think this is the worst possible matchup when you have a team that thrives on taking the ball away, facing a team that turns the ball over too much. I think this Northwestern team is really, really interesting, and I do want to go on the record. 3 weeks ago, I said Northwestern was the second best team in the Big Ten. This was after they beat Iowa, and this was, right after Wisconsin, had the big win in week 1. This was right when, Indiana was just kind of starting to figure stuff out, and Penn State was still good, and I got on that limb with the Cats. That defense is real. I think they're legit. I think Peyton Ramsey has found a way to just kind of settle everything down. Like if he throws a pick, it's not a huge deal. A year ago, they turned it over. It seemed like things would snowball. So just kind of having that veteran presence, I think, kind of stabilized everything and then allowed the defense to just go out and ball.
Right. So I won't speak for you. You did call the Northwestern resurgence quite a while ago. You bought into the fight in Reese Davis's, huh? You knew. You had none of that Joey Galloway energy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was all over the Fighting Reese Davises. And Reese, that's my guy. So I'm glad to see Northwestern fully bought into this thing as well. Not surprised that Pat Fitzgerald thriving on disrespect. He always finds a way to see who's talking about him and channel it toward his team to get a little extra out of them. And so we'll
No,
see.
his
that
email is
goes.
hashtag I don't care. He stays off all that Twitter and stuff. So
That is what he told us, but then at the same time, we get stuff like this. I want to say he called out like Danny Cannell one time after a bowl game that they weren't supposed to win, and they did, and because Danny Cannell said that they weren't going to win. So like he knows what's going on. He might say I don't care,
I better be
but
careful
he
on here.
knows. He knows.
Yeah, he'll get wind of me making fun of his Twitter press conference last year.
Exactly.
But that video that Northwestern put out the other day about the Fighting Reese Davises was
so good.
so well done, so funny. I love that stuff. It's what college football is all about. We need more of that, like just kind of, edgy attitude on social media, gets the people going, as long as it doesn't cross the line, kind of like how Illinois called out Nebraska in that tweet and then deleted it after beating them on Saturday, thanking them for bringing Big Ten football back in a backhanded kind of way. I thought there was nothing wrong with it, but somebody must have, because they took it down eventually after kind of the whole country had seen it.
I definitely chuckled. I thought it was one of those like, okay, well played. We know Nebraska was very vocal about trying to get the league back, and it allowed for teams like Illinois to go in there and get a win. So I thought it was definitely well played. But to your point, like it's cool to see the social media teams like actually go out and have a lot of fun. I want to say Northwestern actually changed their Twitter handle to the Fighting Reese Davises. We've seen Maryland, have the savage stuff. We saw Iowa, kind of troll Minnesota after they beat them. So it's fun kind of seeing people bring this energy to that. It makes it more fun that way.
Moving on to some actual football talk, the game of the weekend that everyone's looking forward to, and it pretty much lived up to it. It came down to the final possession, was Indiana versus Ohio State. For a while there, it looked like it was going to be, about a 3-score game. Indiana kind of was at arm's length. And they picked off Justin Fields a few times, uncharacteristic out of the Buckeyes, and got right back in it and made it a one-possession game to the very end. I was a little surprised that Ryan Day didn't kick the field goal to go up 2 scores with about 4 or 5 minutes left, but it worked out for Ohio State. So you think Indiana is, finally certified as a top 10 team after that performance? Do you think Ohio State is a little bit vulnerable? Is it a little bit of both? What are your takeaways from that game as we look to the rest of the season now?
Yeah, I think it's an all of the above situation. I thought Indiana was good. I thought that they would be able to make plays in the passing game. I mean, their receiver core is legit. We don't talk about Miles Marshall a lot, but, he's a very solid number 3 guy. Everybody kind of talked about Whop Phillier coming into the year, but it's actually been Ty Freifogel that's been the guy for them, especially the last 3 weeks. He's the first Big Ten player ever with consecutive 200-yard receiving games. And so to do that against Michigan State and Ohio State teams that have been known for defense in the past, I think that wowed a lot of people. The fact that Penix, stayed in there, took a bunch of hits, still was able to deliver the ball downfield. So, some of those throws he made were crazy. The throw for nearly 5 bills in the horseshoe, in some rainy conditions too, it says a lot. And I think Indiana actually had a really good chance to win this game. It didn't look that way when it got to be 35-7, but when they would pick Fields off, they do something stupid, like Jamar Johnson picks it off, fumbles it right back, or like David Ellis, they're going in to score and he fumbles at the 5. Indiana had a lot of chances to win this game, especially when they had Ohio State on their heels. If they actually go and score before the half and make it 21-14 and it turns out to be 28-7 instead, it might have been a totally different ball game. I think Indiana really showed how good they are offensively, and their scheme, they got gashed by Master Teague, so we have to acknowledge that. But I think that scheme made Justin Fields look really, really normal, and we hadn't really seen that.
Yeah, so that was an exciting ending. Ohio State now, kind of has that inside track. They always have to Big Ten championship game, but that was toughest hurdle, I think, the rest of the way until the potential Northwestern matchup. We'll see. But the weekend also had some other insane endings. We had the much discussed Minnesota-Purdue game where Minnesota got a win. We had Michigan-Rutgers, which kept us up late into the evening. A little Big Ten after dark action on Saturday. That was a lot of fun. I thought Valentino Ambrosio was going to be the hero. I don't think you can blame a kicker that was on the soccer team, as recently as last season or whatever. He's a walk-on. It's a tough position to put him in from 45. I thought Rutgers should have, he's Monday morning quarterback here, but should have, instead of kneeling down, try to get a few more yards for their man Valentino there at the end. But it is what it is. I don't think there's anything wrong or anything bad if you're a Rutgers fan to take away from that game. They're battling. If you would have told them that, you didn't get destroyed by Ohio State, you almost beat Michigan, you almost beat Illinois, and you did beat Michigan State the way that you did, you would take that going into the season. The interest is there. It's picking back up. It's reflecting in social media and the ratings and all that. People are buying into Schiano, and that extends to the fans, not just the players. So what were your takeaways from some of those wild finishes this weekend? And what do you think was most significant? Was it the Rutgers win? Was it Minnesota getting back on track a little bit? And I guess I'll just lob it to you, H, for the alley. Go ahead and oop it.
So I feel like none of those games are going to affect the race in any way. So I think for me, like the most important takeaway was Rondale Moore finally being back on the field. We had been waiting. And, he was questionable. It was the whole, he opted out, he opted back in, then he got hurt, and we didn't really know what the injury was, and we'll see if he plays this week. Okay, he's not going to play, and that song and dance was going on for the whole year. So to finally be able to see him back out there and to be featured as often as he was, he had 19 targets in his first game back, caught 15 balls, ran a touchdown, and kind of got to see the explosiveness that was missing. You got to see the combo of him and David Bell, which is probably the best 1-2 punch in the Big Ten when both are healthy. So I was happy to see that. I definitely thought Purdue got the short end of the stick on that call. But shout out to Minnesota for figuring out a way to win that game despite having, over 20 people out with various issues. Assuming some of those are probably COVID related. But the Michigan Rutgers I thought was interesting. Obviously with the QB situation in Michigan, we all kind of thought Joe Milton would be the guy coming in, and now Cade McNamara seems to have taken that job from him based off his play the last 2 weeks. And it seems like as soon as he came in, they were down 17-0. The switch got flipped. He provided a spark to the whole team. Michigan returns a kickoff to start the second half, and they just kind of locked it in. I was surprised that it actually went to overtime the way that Michigan controlled most of that second half. But again, shout out to Rutgers for, showing the fight that's been missing in the previous few years. Like you said, to be close to Michigan, outscore Ohio State in the second half, beat Michigan State, to push Indiana, to push Illinois. They're way, way better than they've been. And I think we just have a lot of good receiver talent in this league, whether that's Bo Melton, whether that's Rondale, David Bell. We see Michigan's got Cornelius Johnson, who might be a guy that could be pretty good. Garrett Wilson, Olave. It's a lot of good receivers in this league.
Yeah, that was something watching Friday night with those four receivers. I think Bell and Moore and Bateman are on another level, but Aubin Bell is pretty good too for Minnesota. So those four guys were just putting on a clinic. And David Bell, we know what Rondale Moore can do. David Bell is different, man. Like, he looks like an NFL receiver out there on college field. Like, his hands just kind of attract the ball magnetically. It's wild. We've seen him kind of win games on his own and seal games. And who would have thought when we saw Rondale Moore a couple of years ago, there's somebody coming in who, might be better. It's crazy. So good to see Moore back for sure. I do want to, kind of use those endings, especially the Michigan one, and look ahead to next week a little bit, because there are at least 3 campuses and college towns in the Big Ten right now where the football fans are a little restless. We got Nebraska, like we mentioned. We got Michigan. We haven't talked about Penn State yet. Uh, does that affect your intrigue this weekend coming up with Penn State and Michigan facing off? Kind of a must win for either team, just for morale purposes. And then we got Black Friday back. We thought it was gone last year. I'm pretty sure we talked about that a year ago, but they're facing off with Iowa. And we know Nebraska's not like losing to Iowa, and they've done it a lot in the last 5-6 years. So how does that color your intrigue heading into this weekend?
Yeah, the Black Friday, Nebraska, Iowa is one of the few things that feels normal about 2020. So I'm glad to see that that's back. That's kind of just turned into a nice little rivalry, even though Iowa's controlled it for the most part recently. I'll definitely be watching that. I'm always a fan of, being completely full and watching a little Big Ten football, whether it's a 11 a.m. kick or a 1 p.m. kick as it is this year. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. Just imagine, though, if Michigan would have lost that game to Rutgers and you have 1-4 Michigan against 0-5 Penn State, and it's basically like, two car wrecks playing each other and you can't necessarily turn away from it. And I think that might be why ABC got it, because you got the two big brands who are, top 10, 15 brands in the country, both struggling, and people trying to figure out why that is. At least with Michigan, they were able to pull off that win, and you could sell a little bit of hope. We got the new quarterback, might have found a running back, Hassan Haskins. So I feel like Michigan might have it figured out a little bit more than the other two. I think for Penn State, I think this is just a lost season. Fryer moves out for the year now. Parsons already opted out to start the year. Journey Brown situation. I think this is just kind of a lost year altogether for Penn State. But I think Nebraska might be the most surprising. And I say that because we kept hearing about like how ready to play they were, and like Scott Frost coming home, and it was the perfect hire, and kind of similar to Jim Harbaugh, where you couldn't have found a better guy for this job. And supposedly the weaker division, and they just haven't figured it out. I mean, they can't put two wins together. I mean, they were nearly over 2 touchdown favorite against Illinois and got completely punked at home. And so they're reeling right now, and they don't have a lot of answers.
Yeah, back to the McNamara thing. That was the first time I'd watched Michigan really closely this year, just based on assignments and our schedule and which games we were watching. I'd seen some of them, but that game completely flipped when McNamara came in. For whatever reason, I don't know if they didn't trust Milton. I don't know if he's incapable of moving the ball, but the offense is completely different. Those receivers, like Bell and Sanders, still, were completely unleashed, and it seemed like Michigan was playing really conservative, Milton under center. So it's at least intriguing. I think Michigan fans can get up now for the rest of their games, of seeing what they got, right? Like that's a sliver of hope. Agreed on the Nebraska front. And Penn State. Just a lot of things have been weird for Penn State this year, and they got some stuff to straighten out. And Nebraska, like you said, they need to show up against Iowa to some degree, because the fans are definitely not pleased right now. The rest of the weekend, I mean, what else we got? We got Rutgers Purdue. That's kind of interesting. I think that might be the most intriguing, just
be a lot
unexpectedly intriguing matchup. It's kind of fun. It'll be Rutgers is just fun to watch. Straight up, they make it interesting. They're good for a couple trick plays every game. They play hard. Shiano's at the very least entertaining to watch on the sideline, and then Purdue, like I mentioned, with those receivers, they're a treat as well. So that's a good one. I don't know if I want to watch
Maryland, Indiana, man.
Yeah,
a lot of points in that. Ready to see what Maryland looks like after a couple weeks off. Looks like they're going to try to get that game in. They've been practicing earlier in the week, so we get to see little Tua. We get to see Raheem Jarrett. We get to see this offense go up against Indiana, and I kind of want to see if Indiana has a hangover. Is it we put it all in this Ohio State game and we didn't win. And we know we can't win the East now. It's Maryland. It's a team we should beat. I'll be curious to see kind of Indiana mentally, where are they at in that game.
Yeah, that's a good one to bring up, because for me, I kind of forget about these teams when they go on the COVID list for a couple weeks, right? It wasn't that long ago Maryland was lighting it up, and we'll see what the effects are of missing a couple weeks. But they were they were really fun to watch. I'm sure they still will be. I'm really happy for Talia, like you mentioned, to his brother, because after that week 1 against Northwestern, it was like, man, this is going to be ugly for Maryland this year. But he's turned it around. He's an intriguing story, and it's along with like his brother's rise, getting benched aside on Sunday. Both guys kind of emerging has been cool to see at their respective levels. So great point there. I think Maryland can make it interesting for sure. At least give Indiana some headaches with that speed and athleticism. I'm not sure I want to watch Ohio State, Illinois. I will probably. It's for me. It's the only thing that's that intriguing about that one is the FS1 or Fox Crew. It's Gus and Joel's first time calling a game at Illinois. So I might run into them at the CVS or something this weekend when I'm down there for Thanksgiving. Beyond that, I don't expect the Buckeyes to have too much trouble, but we'll see if Illinois can build on a couple wins and keep it respectable.
Yeah, you shocked the world last year at home, right? Guys were kind of struggling. 30-point dog, pulled it out. Ohio State showing a little vulnerability in that secondary. Second halves have been a letdown. Maybe if Illinois keeps it close for a half, maybe they get some confidence.
In all seriousness, it's fun to see, them take on the Buckeyes once in a while. It doesn't happen every year anymore, but they have that trophy game. So, it'll be a nice little thing to wake up to and get ready for some hoops on Saturday, because we got plenty of it coming up. I don't know. Is there any other football you want to talk, or should we keep it moving to hoops? Got a lot of games coming up, and a handful of them are interesting.
Yeah, we do. I think lastly, just on the football side, I think, last week was kind of a separation week, and I'd be very, very surprised if we don't get Ohio State, Northwestern, and Indy at the end here, which would be the second time in 3 years that we've had that matchup. I think something drastic will have to happen for those two teams not to meet up. But I'm telling you, watch out for Northwestern, man. They got a chance to get in that game undefeated. And if they do, I'd be really curious to see where they're ranked.
Oh, yeah. It's not even like 2 years ago where I don't think anyone really felt Northwestern had that great of a shot to win. I still think Ohio State is the, pretty solid favorite. But just with the way that Ohio State's looked a little vulnerable that we talked about, and how confident, swaggy Northwestern has looked. They got an emerging star in RCB out wide, a really competent quarterback, and just the overall defense. Fitz has been making sure to shout out that defense and the coordinator and the staff and all that. They deserve a lot of respect for what's happened this year. So, we poke fun at the Reese Davis thing, but it's shaping up to be a really memorable season there. So let's keep it moving then to hoops before we wrap up. Harold, what are you looking at heading into the first week of the season? We won't really talk ACC Big Ten Challenge, even though, unbelievably, that's less than 2 weeks away. Let's keep it locked on some of the early marquee non-conference games, assuming they will be played. What do you got your eyes on? I know your Spartan Dogs have a couple big ones right off the jump here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said if they get played, because we got a lot of news on Monday. There's just a lot of moving parts in this thing, and we haven't even started yet. And so, Tennessee had to pause activities because Rick Barnes got COVID. Izzo already had COVID. He's back. Duke had to cancel their game, their opener this week, and Michigan State's supposed to play down there next Tuesday. So, I feel like that's a little dicey. We got cases in South Dakota. It's a big rise there. I believe Iowa, Gonzaga was supposed to be there. So it's just a lot of moving parts right now. It's a lot of uncertainty, which is just so rare. We can normally just point at all of the holiday tournaments and, Ohio State's here and Illinois is there and Michigan State's here. But right now, I feel like we don't even know who's going to play who. We're still waiting on Minnesota. I don't even know if they have their opponent yet for this weekend. There's just so much that's still going on. I do think it's interesting, Michigan State, and they get Notre Dame and Duke within a 4 or 5 day span to kind of get things started. They don't necessarily ease into a schedule like this.
You guys got 3 ACC teams in a week.
Yeah,
or a week and a half.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's not like you get a lot of the games where you can play your directional school or you get to play, some school that's, 300 in RPI or whatever to kind of get your feet wet. You're basically getting a bunch of good non-conference games and 20 conference games. There's not a lot of room for error. So you guys got to be ready to play and got to be ready to play early. And, you don't really have that wiggle room that you might have had in the past. So guys need to go out and get big wins because this conference is brutal, as we've talked about, 7 top 25 teams. So don't lose non-conference games you're supposed to win.
Feels like AAU kind of, just roll the ball out. The other team shows up. I heard they were stuck in traffic. Might have to just pack it up, go back to the hotel and play the next day, and defense might be a little suspect, might be a little rusty at first. I think it's just like kind of the AAU non-conference season here.
Exactly. I want to say your guys get, 3 games in a row all of this weekend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it's interesting because you mentioned kind of the uncertainty, and there are 2 marquee matchups. The big ones, Baylor and Duke, both have had some COVID headlines lately. Scott Drew, like you said, testing positive. So that's kind of up in the air right now. And then Duke's opponent, I can't remember who it was, but I know they were having a game called off right off the bat. So you hope those 2 can be played because those are, 2 – I mean, Baylor's the number 2 team in the country. So 2 top 10 or so matchups. Duke's right around the top 10 as well. Another one I was looking at, without the Gavitt games this year, there's not a whole lot of Big East, Big Ten crossover, which is unfortunate. But Indiana Providence, I believe, is coming up this weekend.
Good matchup too.
That's kind of unique. I'm interested to see what Indiana's got this year because they should be. They're kind of flying under the radar nationally. I think they should be pretty decent.
Yeah, I feel like they're flying under the radar in the Big Ten because we've got 7. Half of the league is ranked, and Indiana's not one of them, which is really, really weird to say, considering they're one of the flagship programs in this conference. But I think it's a big year for Archie, and you get Trace Jackson-Davis back. I mean, a lot of people are expecting big things from him. He's a first-team All-Big Ten talent, and we'll see if he can kind of carry them back to the tournament.
All right. Any other overarching hoops thoughts, H, as we get set here? We had a big preview with Mike DeCourcy, so at risk of repeating and going in depth, you don't have to get too too precise with it, but I'm just really excited to see, obviously the 2, as Tim Miles put it on Kenny Bell's show yesterday, kind of the 80s powers in Illinois and Iowa going at it at the top. Wisconsin's going to be, I just think, kind of a villainous team nationally just by their nature. A lot of seniors, no one real star, and then Brad Davison just gets a lot of flack regardless from whenever we put something on Twitter, it just gets into the bloodstream of the college basketball world, and he's just rubbed people the wrong way with his charges. So that'll be fun to see the reaction all year. Who else we got? I mean, obviously Michigan State, I think, is feeling a little slighted by those 3 teams ahead of them, getting picked pretty much universally ahead of them. And like we said,
I see Rutgers, man. Rutgers with expectations.
Yeah, Purdue.
People expecting them to be good now, to live up to it.
Mm-hmm. Rutgers will be a lot of fun to watch. How do you think they'll be? I think they'll be, the novelty's kind of worn off because they kind of arrived last year. They didn't get their tournament moment, so that's something still to shoot for. But I just think they're just going to be a really solid team. Nobody looks at Rutgers anymore and is like, oh, that's a W.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'll be really curious to see what happens with Rutgers this year because so much of their year last year was how good they were at the rack, and how tough the rack was to play at. And, they only lost 1 home game all year, but, they beat Seton Hall badly. They blew Maryland out there. But, if there's no fans at the rack, how is that, home court advantage? Is it nearly the same as it was a year ago? And Rutgers really, really struggled on the road for most of the year. I want to see, now that they've kind of been through a gauntlet like this with a lot of good players returning, can that experience now help them win games away from the rack that they probably wouldn't have won before? I definitely hope they make the tournament. They were kind of robbed of that a year ago. It would have been awesome to see them, run out with the NCAA patch on their uniform, something we hadn't seen in 30 years. So I'm definitely rooting for them to get there this year.
Got to shoot the ball, be able to do that.
Got to shoot the ball.
Yeah, that'll be big for them. Michigan and Ohio State, are those two teams we're kind of sleeping on? I feel like Michigan is universally maybe a notch above Ohio State in the predictions this year. Holtman, I think we kind of thought would be at this level or higher after his first couple of seasons. There's been some turnover on the roster there. How are we feeling about kind of these middle of the pack to potentially, top 6 or so Big Ten teams?
Yeah, I think Michigan's going to be interesting. Having Livers decide to come back after testing the waters is big. I still think he's not like a one for them. I think Wagner will turn into that. I think he's kind of got all of the swag that his brother has. And if his game starts to match that, we saw, flashes of it a year ago. But if it becomes more consistent, I think he can, certainly make a difference. He's a first team Big Ten talent as well. So I'd be curious to see, if he can elevate that. And we've seen Xavier Simpson kind of be the leader of that team for 3 years. And so much of, Michigan's offense revolved around him and ball screens and him, leading the conference in assists and stuff like that. And now it's going to be completely different. They're getting a Wake Forest transfer in to help them out. And Ohio State, obviously, with Seth Towns transferring in from Harvard, the fact that both teams are kind of relying on transfers to help them out, I think, is an interesting parallel.
Absolutely, yeah. Chauncey Brown, right, is the Michigan one. Yeah, so I can't wait for it. I'm going to have to, especially at home, at my house where I'm going, the TV setup is not great. I almost need to go Black Friday shopping or something to fix this because I'm not going to be able to flip fast enough between football and basketball this weekend. So I hope you have a better setup than me at least. I
won't say setup per se, but it's not bad. It's certainly not bad. Now I'll have to, I don't know if fight is the word, but my father-in-law definitely likes the sports as well. So I know we'll both be watching stuff all weekend. Unfortunately, for work, I'll be watching a lot of football, even though I should be watching some basketball. So trying to find a balance there, flipping back and forth. My thumb's going to get a big workout hitting that last button a bunch of times. And maybe I have to have the volume up on another TV to kind of hear it in the background while I'm watching another one. That part's always challenging, but hey, there's a lot worse things.
Last question. Do we have anyone in Maui? Because I know I went to Asheville. What's going on there?
I thought Indiana was supposed to be out there.
I did too.
But I hadn't heard the latest on the
maybe that's a Maui game. Could be.
I hadn't heard the latest on that one yet. But again, I feel really, really bad for those who were supposed to be in Atlantis and Maui, and you're thinking you're going to be on the beach, and you get a week to just kind of you play, but then when you're done, you can kind of hang out and enjoy everything, and now you don't get a chance to do that.
Okay, so that is the Maui Invitational. I just looked it up. Yeah, so Indiana has, they have potentially a few intriguing matchups coming up, depending on how they do in that Providence game. Yeah, the Asheville Invitational.
Yeah.
Hey, like we talked about earlier, Asheville's nothing. It's nothing. It's not it's no slouch of a town, but
no,
like you said, it's not not high enough. No. So, all right, H. Appreciate you jumping on.
No
appreciate
problem.
you taking some time out of this week. It's a lot, I know, but safe and happy Thanksgiving to you. We'll be back at it soon enough, either to preview or put a bow on the Big Ten ACC Challenge. We'll be back soon enough, and looking forward to diving into college hoops. It's my favorite.
Oh yeah, it's my favorite too. I definitely enjoy it, and I think our teams are going to finish 1-2 in the Big Ten in hoops. I know that might not be too popular, but I got to see Iowa actually guard somebody for 20 games, and I think Wisconsin benefited from a somewhat unbalanced schedule to make the run that they did. So I'm going with Illinois and Michigan State in some order to win the league.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and I'll leave it at that. I'll let Brent Urena take heat for his predictions. He puts his predictions out there in the public Twitterverse, and I'm like, that's a no-win thing.
No.
Brent, but shout out to him for having the courage to do that and expose himself to all the fan bases and their slanders. So I will agree with you though that the 1-2 is how I see it shaking out as well. So
Great minds think alike. I hope it turns out that way.
All right, man. Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
All right. Thanks once again to Harold, Mike DeCourcy for joining the show. Appreciate everyone tuning in, fitting this into a busy time of year. Hopefully, you can pop it in during your travel, your drive to wherever you're going for Thanksgiving, or your meal prep, or doing the dishes. I feel like even during the holidays when podcasts tend to kind of get buried, there are windows and pockets to fit it into your routine. Maybe you're trying to run off some of those calories from Thursday's meal on Friday morning, something like that. So hope you guys get a chance to tune in, and I hope continue to do so. It's easier to do that if you subscribe to the show on any of our platforms. Let me list those out real quick. We got Apple Podcasts. I believe Google Play is now Google Podcasts, so migrate on over there if you're an Android person like myself. You got Podbean, you got your Spotify. It's pretty much everywhere podcasts can be found. And then also we are on YouTube as well. These interviews are on video. If you want to see our faces, do that on Big Ten Network YouTube channel. There is a Take 10 podcast playlist, so make sure you're subscribing to the Big Ten Network YouTube channel for everything we put on there. A lot of good stuff, including the Take 10 and On the Bench podcast. Shout out Mike Hall with his podcast. He's got a few episodes in the bank on already. So podcast network is growing at Big Ten Network. Definitely don't miss out. All right, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks to Julie Bronder for stitching it together on a holiday week. I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving, great, healthy, and safe holiday, and enjoys watching plenty of Big Ten football and basketball. We'll talk about it all very soon, and we'll see you next time here on the Take 10 podcast.